So tonight, as Mariah said, we are kicking off the introduction series to our Rev Hampton here in Hampton, and we have an amazing author, speaker, and I'll go ahead and call him a historian because he's done some serious research that he is so gratefully willing to share with us this evening. I do have a bio that I would like to share with you all to give you a sense of who we're being graced in the presence with today. So Michael Cecere is a retired history teacher who resides in Williamsburg, Virginia with his wife, Susan. Originally from Maine, cold country, he taught high school and college level American history for 30 years in Fairfax County and Gloucester County, Virginia. The author of 25 books and numerous articles on the American Revolution and Revolutionary War, he continues to research and write even in his retirement. Talk about a heavy pen. His most recent book, entitled Spark of Independence, was published this past November, and it examines the New England colonies in 1775-76. It completes a 3-book series that also examines the Middle colonies, united for independence, and the Southern colonies, marched to independence, from the start of the war throughout independence. He also has recently completed with his daughter a trilogy of historical fiction that follows 3 children in Williamsburg as they experience the revolution over 10 years. Ideal for young readers and those who enjoy historical fiction, these 3 titles, Witness to Revolution, Witness to War, and Witness to Victory, enlighten readers about colonial life, the revolution, and the Revolutionary War. When he is not writing, he volunteers and works at Colonial Williamsburg, sometimes as a tobacco farmer, other times as a soldier, or a colonial dancer. We did not pay him enough to dance tonight. So if you get a dance, you're getting a treat. Absolutely, but we're definitely delighted to have him here. He also participates in the Revolutionary War reenactments throughout the East Coast, and he lectures at historic sites and historic societies. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Michael Cecere.
Yes, in fact, I'm supposed to be a soldier tonight, and I found somebody to take my shift. It's a neat program they do. It's called In Defense of Liberty up there in Williamsburg, and it's a school group thing, so the teacher in me enjoys it, especially since we get to be drill sergeants to these kids. You kind of treat them like, get over here, get over here, and all that. Oh, what happened? Did you guys see the It was up there for a second, wasn't it? All right, I don't know if they're, well, I thought I saw, maybe it was my computer that I saw. Right. Well, anyway, we'll get started. Okay, yeah, it was, oh, I see. The tech guy.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that.
We were going to put him on the spot today.
Yeah, I was gonna,
But we got it.
The dancing is absolutely a delight. I enjoy that a lot. And learning how to do English country dancing, and believe it, a guy like me, can minuet now in the governor's palace. And please come and see it. Where the Christmas program is about this, going to start around Thanksgiving, and every Wednesday and Friday they invite public in, and you get to dance with us. But that's not why I'm here. This is why I'm here. I want to talk about the war reaching Virginia, okay? So obviously I think I've chatted with a lot of you already, and everyone is excited, just as I am, that it's the 250th anniversary of 1775. I've been waiting for this for several years now. We're doing a lot of 250th events. We've got one next weekend. This weekend coming up over at Kemp's Landing, or it's actually at City View Park. And then we have one at Great Ridge. We are not going to burn down Norfolk. No one's going to burn down Norfolk. I know that. Our plans for Hampton, which I'm very disappointed it didn't happen, because Hampton is such an important battle that gets overlooked, fell through this year. Who knows? Maybe we'll try to organize a reenactment at Hampton. We did it in 2015 not easy because you got to get boats. And getting boats, I mean, big boats, it's a stretch. So, it's 1775, so I'm going to go back to April. I'm going to go back to, essentially, you guys all know, Lexington and Concord. Lexington and Concord is April 19th, 1775. So before that happens, let's look at Virginia and the situation. There he is, Lord Dunmore, John Murray, the Earl of Dunmore. He is the royal governor, going to be the last royal governor of Virginia. The House of Burgesses has been suspended. That is our, essentially, that's our General Assembly. That's our legislative branch. They've been suspended ever since 1774, the year earlier, and their support and their resolution for a day of prayer for the poor people of Boston after the Boston Tea Party and the Intolerable Acts. There have been 2 conventions so far. The first one was a rather focused convention that happened in August of 1774, and mostly what they did was they picked these amazing delegates to go to represent Virginia in the Congress in Philadelphia. We're talking about Peyton Randolph, Patrick Henry, George Washington, a whole bunch of others. Berkeley Plantation, Benjamin Harrison, yes, and there's several others are there. The second one is the famous one that happened in Richmond at the church. That's the "Give me liberty or give me death," Patrick Henry. I hope you all know what he was asking for when he uttered those words. All he wanted was for Virginia to be put on a proper stance of defense. And what that was, or ended up being, was each county was requested to raise a company of troops or a company of men, militia, or a troop of horse. That's it. It's not a major military buildup, but still it was a symbolic thing. So that's happened. That happened a month earlier in March. Okay? Now comes April, and on April 21st, before we even know what happened at Lexington and Concord, we have our own issue. The gunpowder stolen. We reenacted that at Williamsburg in April. That was a really big deal when Dunmore had the gunpowder removed from the powder magazine to a British warship in the James River. Okay, why would he do that? What's going on? And he comes up with an excuse, everybody kind of calms down, and then the news of Lexington and Concord arrives on April 29th in Williamsburg. And all of a sudden it's like, huh? What? What were they looking for up in Massachusetts? They were looking for gunpowder and guns? Well, that's what our royal governor just took too. Can you say conspiracy? Conspiracy. There's a plot to disarm us. This is Patrick Henry. He's leading troops from Hanover County and New Kent County to go and confront the governor in early May. There was almost a clash then. The Dunmore was reported to have threatened in public burning down the town and freeing the slaves and arming them to defend himself from this renegade right here. Cooler heads prevailed again in May, but by June, the governor has fled. Okay, he flees. He decides, this situation is out of control for me here. I'm worried about being seized. So early in the morning of June 8th, he flees. I'll tell you why he fled. Because he was tipped off that some of his letters were going to be printed in the Gazette that day and the next days, and the following days. These were letters he wrote right before Christmas in December to London, and he was basically characterizing what was going on. He was criticizing it. He was giving advice to the British ministry about how to defeat the Virginians in their struggle to resist the British Parliament. And once those letters went public, he was afraid that people would be very, very upset with him and maybe seize him. So he fled, goes down Queens Creek, down to the York River, and now he's on board a British warship. Okay, meanwhile, what's going on in the summer? We're going to fly through the summer and get to the fall. We want to get to the present time. In the summer, in June, governor's gone. He won't come back. The House of Burgesses had actually been convened, but now there's no sense for him to meet because there's no governor or even Privy Council to approve any of the legislation. So they basically peter to the end. But Virginians get worried about rumors of British troops coming, so they ask for volunteers. So Williamsburg in the summer of 1775, 250 years ago this summer, is full of about 250 volunteer militia. There's one neat letter from a guy, a lieutenant from Albemarle County. He's a friend of Thomas Jefferson's. His name is Lieutenant Gilmer. And he talks about how they're not doing anything. Their camp that will in a grove outside behind Campbell's Tavern but they basically have very little discipline, and it's Colonel Charles Scott's fault, or Captain Charles Scott. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Captain Charles Scott, but he's going to work his way up and get Brigadier General, just like George Wheaton and William Woodford, who you hopefully have heard of, and General Muhlenberg, Peter Muhlenberg. So Charles Scott is basically, he's got a little bit of French and Indian War experience, and he's in charge. But he doesn't want to offend the troops, because they're all volunteers. So if you fall asleep on guard duty, or if you basically fire your gun without authority, you get confined to your tent for 2 hours. That's the kind of discipline he's dealing with. And Lieutenant Gilbert basically says, look, we're spending more time feasting in the taverns than we are doing any military drills or exercises. The third convention meets, the third Virginia Convention. By the way, I should have mentioned, these conventions were extra legal. They were not legislative bodies. They were basically representatives from, 2 representatives from each county in Virginia is sent to these conventions to represent in the place of the House of Burgesses. And the third convention is the one that rolls up their sleeves and says, we're going to get serious now. So in August, up until all the way to the end of August, I should say, they hammer out a plan to raise 2 regiments of regulars. Now, regulars, we haven't had regulars for 20 years. The British Army, that's regular. Those are regular troops. We don't need regular troops. They're our army back then. But now we do. So they argue a little bit about who's going to be in charge. Patrick Henry's the most popular guy in Virginia. And there are a lot of people, though, that know him and don't think he'd make a good commander. But yet, his popularity prevails, and he is named Commander Colonel of the 1st Virginia Regiment. William Woodford is a veteran of the French and Indian War, been a lieutenant, I think, during the French and Indian War. He's much more qualified and experienced. He's named commander of the 2nd Virginia Regiment, okay? Well, also what happens, I should mention, each regiment's going to be made up of, I think it was 7 and 8 companies. The 1st Virginia gets 8 companies. Woodford's, I think, only got 7 companies, and then there was one other company that was left on the Eastern Shore, a company of regulars left on the Eastern Shore to protect the Eastern Shore. And so they come up to over 1,000 men. 1,000 men who agreed to serve for a year. That's a straight year. Now, somebody that I have overlooked in this, and I should have mentioned already, is these are not the 1st Virginia regulars, are they? There's already one very important one, and and 2 companies of riflemen that the Continental Congress had raised or had authorized in June of 1775. In fact, June 14th is the birthday of the American Army, and that's because that's the day that they authorized 10 companies of riflemen. Everybody thought in the early war that these Virginia and Pennsylvania riflemen were going to be the secret weapon, with their damn twisted guns, I think is the phrase that I've seen written. And of course, I was talking about George Washington being appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, which is 95% New England at this point. But there are 2 companies, and you know who leads those 2 companies? Captain Hugh Stevenson, who unfortunately is going to die within a year or so, so he doesn't really get fame. But the next guy gets a lot of fame. Daniel Morgan, Captain Daniel Morgan, right? And so he's going to be everywhere in the story of the Revolution. So those regulars, though, are out. So Virginians have marched and gone to Boston. Morgan, actually, at this point is with Benedict Arnold. They've already marched through Maine, and they're in Canada trying to attack Quebec. So there are Virginians involved in the war in that capacity. But nothing has happened here. Here, we've raised 2 regiments of regulars, 15 battalions of Minutemen. Each battalion is supposed to be 500 strong. And then we reauthorized the county militia, which basically says anybody between the ages of 16 to 60 is in the militia, period. All right. Meanwhile, what has Dunmore done? Dunmore has kind of sat and used the British Navy for his protection, but he's kind of powerless to do much until some regulars, British regulars, 14th Regiment troops from St. Augustine show up in August, all right, late July, early August. They come in little detachments, and now he's got about 150 of these guys by the fall. That's it, and then he's trying to get some Tory or Loyalist support, but there's not a lot of that, and we haven't gotten into the enslaved people yet. That hasn't really happened. Okay, so I've got this map here to show you just what happened is the convention had decided to make Virginia into 16 military districts. So when you talk about the Minutemen, and we did have Minutemen, they are the more active militia. You've got regulars, Minutemen, and then militia. So the Minutemen are being raised like in chunks. Like the Middle Peninsula is going to raise a company of Minutemen, or a battalion, I should say, a battalion of Minutemen. And so up in Northern Virginia, you've got the Prince William Battalion, made up of Fairfax, Loudoun, Prince William County, maybe Stafford too, for that matter. So that's what's going on throughout all of Virginia. Okay, now let's get a little bit more clued into Dunmore. Dunmore doesn't show up. So Dunmore has been sitting off of Yorktown until mid-July, and then he sails around Yorktown, and he ends up over here in the Elizabeth River for the rest of the summer, and he's there in September. That doesn't show up as good as I had hoped, but this is a drawing, a period of a map. Norfolk, Portsmouth, Elizabeth River. Hopefully you've all been down there so you know what I'm talking about. And so Dunmore is aboard ship. He's not aboard land, okay? Yes, he does come aboard land. But in late September, he sends a landing party, a small group of men, British Marines, maybe there were some 14th men with them, but it's a small little group, and they come ashore, and they seize John Holt's printing press and two of his workers. They might have been servants, can't recall, but they're seized. Why? Because he's tired of all the stuff Holt is printing about Captain Squire, about Dunmore himself, so he shuts down the press. He shuts it down. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is that he goes into town with, here's a quote here, about 35 men. Is that right? No, about 15 men. He goes into Norfolk, and there are hundreds of men. There are drums beating and all that. But nobody lifts a finger to stop these guys. And that sends a message to Dunmore, because he quickly, and you can see it in the letters. If you read the letters, there's a wonderful resource. It's called Revolutionary Virginia. It's in 7 volumes, I think. And they've collected it, almost everything you could find that was written either in the newspapers or intercepted letters. And you see these people commenting on this, and you'll see some of my quotes in just a second. Because what happens is that lack of response to this small little raiding party emboldens Dunmore. And next thing you know, he's sending redcoats ashore in Princess Anne and Norfolk County almost on a daily basis. Here they are, October 12th. 40 redcoats march 3 miles into the countryside and destroy 17 cannon and bring 2 more. Now, when we say cannon, we're not talking about cannon on wheeled carriages. We're probably talking about cannon tubes or maybe cannon on ship carriages that have been moved inside. I mean, inland, away from the coast, to prevent this from happening, but it still happens. A few days later, 70 redcoats sail to Newtown, which is next to Kempsville. 200 militia are actually drilling nearby, but offer no resistance. The redcoats march around, searching for more arms and powder, but they don't find much, yet they capture a few militia officers, and there's no resistance. October 20th, after another raid, Dunmore brags to Lord Dartmouth, "I can assure your lordship that landing in this manner has discouraged exceedingly the rebels, and has raised the spirits of the friends of government," the Tories, or the Loyalists, "so that they are offering their services." That's what Dunmore writes. Now, this little phase of October comes to a screeching halt right there. You guys hopefully recognize this. This is Hampton Roads, right? Point Comfort, Hampton River, there's Hampton right there. All right, and so what happens is this. I have to go back a little bit and tell you the story about a hurricane. There was a hurricane in early September that had washed ashore a tender. Now, tenders are smaller sailing vessels that tend to the British warships that are here. We've got the Otter, the Kingfisher might be around by now. I can't remember if the Kingfisher is here in early September, but I know it's here in November and October. So the big warships have 20 guns, 4-pound, 6-pound cannon, 150 British sailors on them. The tenders tend to be a lot smaller. They're sloops or schooners, and they may throw on some swivel guns. You guys know the difference between a swivel gun and a deck cannon. Okay, swivel guns are really 1-pound cannon that are best used to scour the deck and try to almost anti-personnel, whereas the cannon, they're heavier. They'll project bar shot, chain shot, or 4-pound, 6-pound cannonballs puncture a hole in the hull of the ship. But a swivel gun's not going to do that. So some of these tenders are lighter armed. They're not armed as well. And so what happens is this: Captain Squire, Matthew Squire, it's a name that's very important to Hampton and this whole area. He, for some reason, gets caught in the storm and gets washed ashore in the storm, beached, and he flees and he's able to escape. But the local militia of Hampton track down most of his crew, or capture most of his crew, and they take all the supplies. There's some swivel guns and muskets and sailing equipment. They take all that out and they burn the vessel to the waterline. They burn it. Now Squire is very upset by this, and so what he does is he parks a small little squadron, mostly of tenders. The main warships are still over in Norfolk, but he's armed several ships. There's up to 5 ships, and they've been blockading Hampton for the last month. And now, in late October, he decides it's time to make a move. I'm going into that town, I'm going to burn it, because they haven't returned the things that they stole, His Majesty's equipment. So he's going to sail right up the Hampton River, and burn Hampton. All right, so this is a close-up of it. This is a great French map from 1781 that I like to use. Now today, and I was there on the anniversary of this is October 26, 27, I believe. Today, this is the Veterans Hospital, right? This is Hampton University over here. This is the Veterans Hospital, and you can go there and see the actual spot where they were probably, where the first fighting happened. Because the people of Hampton expected this. So what they did is they scuttled vessels in the channel. There's a map in the hallway drawn in 1781 that actually has the soundings that shows you, 10 feet, 3 feet, 7 feet, whatever. I think it's feet. I don't know. Check. It might be fathoms, so that'd be awful deep. And so it's got to be right here by that map that I saw, that they sunk a couple of vessels to obstruct the channel. So on the 26th, when Squire makes his move, he can't get through. And if you go over to the Veterans Hospital, you can kind of envision all that and the fighting that happened, because there were militia and there was a company of regulars down here and there were Minutemen down here, and this is the account, some of the accounts. This is first Lord Dunmore's account, probably given to him by Captain Squire. And he says, some of the king's tenders went pretty close into Hampton Road. So soon as the rebels perceived them, they marched out against them. And the moment they got within shot of our people, George Nicholas, who commanded a party of rebels at that time in Hampton, fired at one of the tenders, whose example was followed by his whole party. The tenders returned the fire, but without the least effect. There you have it, guys. According to Lord Dunmore, we don't know who fired the first shot in Lexington and Concord. We don't, right? That's a shot heard around the world. But we know that the treasurer's son, Robert Carter Nicholas' son, George Nicholas, started the war in Virginia, according to Lord Dunmore. But there's another account. In the newspaper, it wasn't Lord Dunmore that did it. I'm sorry, it wasn't George Nicholas that did it. It was the ships that fired first. 2 volleys of musketry were discharged from the tenders. They started it, right? You know how important it is. I taught for 30 years. We don't know when there's a fight between kids. Who started it, right? And answered by Captain Lynn from his post by a rifle. Now, Lynn had a rifle, and according to this, he was able to knock off or hit the target he was aiming at, because rifle barrels are much more accurate than smoothbore muskets. So he answered from his post by a rifle, which was answered by a 4-pounder from one of the tenders. Then began a pretty warm fire from all of the tenders. Captain Nicholas, observing this, soon joined. So I don't know what the eyewitness accounts after the fact that were published at that time period. And the fight happened, and the fight lasted well over an hour, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours. And essentially, if you read all this, it says the tenders couldn't get through the obstruction, and they couldn't really get any closer than 300 yards because of the fire from the shore was so intense. But again, this is day one. The next day's fighting is going to be a lot worse. So here's what happens. They're stuck here. I'm imagining there were troops that kind of waited and watched, but most kind of settled down. Meanwhile, word has made its way up to Williamsburg that there's been an attack on Hampton. What happens? Colonel of the 2nd Virginia, William Whitford, comes down with 1 company of rifles rifleman in town yet. Even his own rifleman, he was supposed to have 2 rifle companies, and neither one of them had shown up yet, because they're coming from the far frontier. And so he brings these Culpeper guys down. They have rifles. They show up around 7 o'clock. There's the church. You see the kind of square inside the square? That's the church that's right behind us right now, today. So they get there in a pouring rain. Woodford drops them off at the church, lets them dry, goes down, sees that the vessels haven't moved from the reports that he got. They were trying to get through, they hadn't gotten through. So he sees that they're still there, and then he checks out everybody seems ready to receive them. And then he goes to Mr. Carey's house, which I'm guessing is somewhere, I don't know, it doesn't show up on this map at all. I think it shows up on the one in the hallway. And he wants to dry himself and have breakfast. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, half hour, it's not clear how much time passes, maybe an hour. All of a sudden he hears cannon fire. And when he rushes down to the wharf at the foot of King Street, he sees that many of the men that are supposed to be there have fled, and there are 5 British ships now kind of trying to deliver broadsides into Hampton, right? And so he rushes, he goes and gets those riflemen, and he posts them inside a house right here, probably where the Air and Space Museum is now, some of that area, because I'm sure it didn't extend as far then as it does now, into the river. And then the Minute Company and some of the militia are sent to protect the rear, because there's a report that they may have landed troops on Back River. And so the regulars are here too, and they're fighting, and they're using the homes and the houses and all for protection. And it's a standoff, it's a bloody fight. Here's a description from Dunmorgan. Now again, he's not the best source because he's not there, but I'm guessing he's relaying what was relayed to him from probably Captain Squire. The tenders returned again to the creek and ran up very near the town. The rebels, being reinforced and taking possession of the houses, made a very heavy fire upon them, but only killed 1 or 2 of the men and wounded several others. Took a pilot boat. There were 5 boats. 2 of them were pilot boats, so 1 of the boats were captured, that the gentlemen of the Navy had made a tender of, and made 7 men prisoners belonging to the Otter that were in her. The loss of the rebels must have been very inconsiderable. That's a very rare comment. Almost every time I read an account of a battle from the other side, they always talk about, oh, they must have suffered more. But he says very inconsiderable, if they suffered at all. The tenders were towed out of the creek by the boats. Now I want you to imagine what that's about. You got 4 vessels left, and they're under heavy fire, rifle fire, so much so, is there another one? No. So the fire is so intense that the crew is having trouble crewing their guns and crewing the vessel. They're trying to get below to get out of harm's way. And so then the Captain Squire gives up and says, let's tow them out of there. Why are they towing them out? The tide's probably against them. The wind's definitely against them, because they talked about a fresh wind blowing in there. So those poor guys in the rowboats now are rowing and pulling those tenders down the river. How much firing is going on for the shore? I wonder. I don't know. You know, maybe these guys had a little sympathy on them. Because you have to remember this, guys. These are not Americans fighting British in 1775. These are British colonists fighting fellow Englishmen in their mind. So I don't know how persistent they were in maintaining that fire all the way down. Okay, but this battle with Hampton, this is where the fighting began. This is I mentioned the Rubicon that has been crossed here. Now there's bloodshed in Virginia, and there were losses on the British side, that's what's on our side. Okay, what happens next? Most of the action is now going to transfer over to southeastern Virginia on the other side. And that I know you look at this map and you're thinking, what in the world is that? But Hampton is up there. So there's the Elizabeth River. That's Kemp's Landing. Great Bridge is over here. Great Bridge, Kemp's Landing, Norfolk, Portsmouth. And this is going to be the new area right now, right where we are right now, today in November, 250 years ago. All the focus is there. I found this letter. I went back and forth whether I would share it, because it's a lot, it's wordy. But I decided I want you to see the attitude, even after the Battle of Hampton, of a British sailor from the Otter. I doubt he was in the battle. He might have been. But basically, he says, the people in this province and that of Maryland are equally as refractory as those in the northward. So we're just as rebellious as those in the north, but want both force and courage to act. Okay, this is interesting, listen closely. We have nothing to fear from them, as they most certainly are the greatest poltroons existing, for they never will face a body, but unless when under cover of woods, houses, etc. Where they are sure you can't come at them, they are all heroes. Their method of fighting is as soon as they have fired to run. They strictly adhere to the old maxim of Sir John Falstaff, him that fights and runs away may live to fight another day. I just thought that was a neat observation made on November 8th from a sailor aboard the Otter, okay? All right, so now, like I said, in the more modern map from my book, the action, the theater of operations is going to all be here now for the rest of the story, the rest of the year. And it starts at Kempsville, or Kemp's Landing. So on November 15th, now you guys know, many of you may be aware of this, and I've seen a lot of people posting about it, but I don't know if they should. On November 7th, Lord Dunmore writes a proclamation. It's known as the Royal Proclamation. He writes it. But you know that old phrase, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, does it make a sound? If you write a proclamation and you don't announce it, is it even there? Because that's what he does. He writes the proclamation on November 7th. That's true. We know that. But he doesn't release it yet because he's unsure that he can back up what it says. He doesn't think he has enough force, and he's waiting for help that's not coming from the British, and so he's holding on to it. That's why Kemp's Landing is such an important skirmish. It's not much of a fight. I'm a reenactor. I love a lot of reenacting battles. Reenacting this battle involves me putting my troops in some brush and woods, the British marching kind of right past us doing what we call scattered fire, pop, 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 reload, pop, 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 and then we run. Now, if I've got a guy driving 3 hours to do that, that's not very fun. But nevertheless, it's very, very significant. And here is an account from the captain of the commander, I should say, of the 14th Regiment that was with Lord Dunmore on this battle. They both were there. They were both at Kemp's Landing. So they're looking for more arms and things. That's why they're out in the countryside. When we arrived inside of Kemp's Landing, our advance guard was twice fired on. That's very useful for me. Now I know on Saturday my guys are going to fire twice by the rebels who had concealed themselves in very thick woods on the left of the road. But upon our rushing, which now I know that the enemy rushed, and among them they were soon totally routed. Their very precipitate flight and the closeness of the woods prevented our giving a much better account. It is said that some of them ran away even before the firing began. However, 5 of the rebels that we know of were killed, 2 drowned. Here's Dunmore's account. He says about a mile outside of Kemp's Landing, our advance party was fired on by the rebels in a thicket. I immediately ordered the main body, who were within 200 or 300 paces, to advance, and then detach the party to go around them with volunteers, which means loyalists or Tories, to outflank them. At the same time, the advance guard with the grenadiers rushed them. The rebels fled on all quarters. We pursued them above a mile. 4 or 5 were killed, a good many wounded, and 18 taken prisoners. So I love that. The numbers are a little more, concrete there. But those are the 2 accounts. Now, our first account in the Virginia Gazette painted a much better picture of our fighting, and it was John Page, basically the Lieutenant Governor on Privy Council, who gave that account. But then he learned a week or 2 later that it was false. We did not do well at Kemp's Landing. Okay, this is the important part of this stuff. Dunmore's proclamation. He announces it on the same day, November 15th. He proclaims basically martial law, calls on all loyal Virginians to support him, and then adds this one that's going to get all the attention. And I do hereby further declare all indentured servants, slaves, or others appertaining to rebels free that are able and willing to bear arms. They joining His Majesty's troops as soon as may be for more speedily reducing this colony to a proper sense of its duty. He's offering freedom to runaway slaves and indentured servants of rebels, not women, by the way. He's not offering this to women. He's offering still significant. It's a very significant move on his part. And what's the impact of this? This is Dunmore explaining what's happened. The slaves are flocking in, also from all quarters, which I hope, this is the middle of a letter, so I just plucked this out. From all quarters, which I hope will oblige the rebels to disperse and take care of their families and property. And had I but a few more men here, I would march immediately to Williamsburg. So that's how confident he is 2 weeks after Kemp's Landing, that enslaved people are flocking to him, and he still doesn't have enough weapons to furnish them, but things are looking bright. Okay, this is from a gentleman named John Brown, who wrote this on November 21st. He's reflecting a few days later. The day after Dunmore's proclamation, the whole country flocked to it, took the oath of allegiance, and declared their readiness to defend His Majesty's crown. I can assure you, Lord Dunmore is so much admired in this part of the country that he might have 500 volunteers to march with him in any part of Virginia. So it sounds like the Tories, the Loyalists, at least in Southeast Virginia, are coming to his aid. And then Lord Dunmore himself, reflecting a week after he wrote that other letter, he's had about 3,000 people have taken the oath of allegiance, basically swearing their allegiance to the king and the governor himself. But of this number, not about 300 or 400 at most are in any degree capable of bearing arms, and the greatest part of them have never used guns. He's trying to raise a regiment of what they call Queen Owns Loyalists, and then another regiment of Ethiopian troops. Those are the runaway slaves that he's going to arm and train, and he's got to equip. That's the big challenge. Okay. So at this point, it's early. I mean, now we're in early December, and everything seems to be going Dunmore's way. But he has one problem that he's worried about. There are hundreds and hundreds of troops marching from Williamsburg. They crossed the James River, and they're marching through Smithfield, and now they're in Suffolk. And late in November, in fact, they show up at a Great Bridge. Why is that important? Here's that map, right here. There's Great Bridge, there's Kemp's Landing, there's Norfolk. Dunmore has decided now, in his newfound confidence, that he's going to make Norfolk his base of operations. That's going to be my base of operations. Now, getting to Norfolk by land is not easy back in 1775. And if you control the Great Bridge, which is a bridge and causeway that kind of gets you through a big swampy area, because you've got the whole Dismal Swamp down here too, then you essentially control much of this area. And then if you're also holding Kemp's Landing, that's a crossroads. Look at all the roads. This is like the Bastogne of Princess Anne County in that regard. And so you pretty much got all this that are now secure. And so that's what Dunmore decides to do. That's exactly what he was doing when he went to Kemp's Landing. I mean, when he fought at Kemp's Landing, he had sent troops down to Great Bridge because he had heard there were North Carolina militia there, and there was nobody there. So then he left a detachment, and they built a fort to defend the crossing at the Great Bridge. And they tore up the bridge, by the way. And then they marched to Kemp's Landing, and that's when the ambush happened. So now it's 2 weeks later, and what had happened is way up there is Williamsburg, and these hundreds of troops under the 2nd Virginia, under Colonel William Woodford, and the Culpeper Minutemen, 5 companies of them, have now arrived on the other side of Great Bridge. So now you have this kind of standoff. This is a map drawn by one of the officers involved, and you see the fort that I mentioned. So this is north. I know it's a little counterintuitive, but this is north, and that is south, and these are the earthworks. Now, this is not drawn to scale, so it's a little bit confusing here. But today, if you go to Great Bridge, that's where Woody's is. That's a restaurant, okay? This is over here somewhere where the museum is. The canal that crosses probably goes right here. And they know where the earthworks are. And they know because we're going to be fighting at our reenactment over by where the Culpeper earthworks were. So basically, in late November, advanced detachments show up and dig in, and now you've got a standoff that lasts a week. There was a lot of fighting, a lot more fighting at Great Bridge than just this one attack that happened on December 9th. There was fighting 5 miles down the river several times. There might have been fighting over on this side as well. So they were probing each other, but on December 9th, Dunmore makes a big mistake. This is from my book. This kind of gives you an idea. Again, it's the same idea. Lieutenant Travis is in charge of the picket guard on the morning of December 9th. The Culpeper men are over on the flank here. They've got rifles, so their accuracy and their range is much greater. And what happened is this. Dunmore got reports that cannon were being brought up from North Carolina, and that his fort was not designed to stop cannon. It was not an earthen fort, it was a palisade fort, wood. And so he's afraid that the cannon's gonna just tear his fort apart. So he decides to act. He's gonna attack these shirtmen, they're called. He calls them the shirtmen because they're all wearing hunting shirts. He's gonna attack them and disperse them. The plan was for a portion of his troops under, a portion of his troops were to cross the river and then march on Great Bridge and cause a diversion. They never did that. They never crossed. They misunderstood their orders and they basically went to the crossing point and stood there like it was on guard duty. Then in the morning at sunrise, they had the bridge reconstructed because they had all the planks on their side, and they start putting the planks down. And every night, the rebels, the Shermen, would put sentries on outposts to listen, kind of forward observers, and then they would withdraw them at dawn. Well, on this morning, they notice the activity, and they start firing. All right, now, you got to remember, it's been a week. They've been there for a week, and there's been firing going on every day. Cannon fire and indiscriminate musket fire. So when the firing begins, the bulk of the American forces, or the rebel forces, the Virginians, are sleeping and camped in the town of Great Bridge. And they literally, and you can see the accounts from the officers, they don't think anything of it. This is just a regular morning when they're firing a few shots, no big threat. But the guys that here know it's a threat, and they start firing as fast as they can. And there was a great account. Listen to this. This is in the paper. I get it from the naval documents, but you can find it in Pinckney's Gazette too, his Virginia Gazette. The conduct of our sentinels I cannot pass over in silence, those guys that were under the advance. Before they quit their station, they fired at least 3 rounds as the enemy were crossing the bridge, and one of them, who was posted behind some shingles, kept his ground till he had fired 8 times. And after receiving a whole platoon, who apparently fired back at him, made his escape over the causeway. How many of you have visited the Army Museum in Yorktown? Have you ever gone over there to the State Museum over there? They have an orientation film. They show this happen. The person that fired 8 rounds, we think, and pretty certain, is a guy named Billy Floor. He was a free black man serving the militia, who apparently was the guy who stayed there and fired 8 rounds. Now, firing 8 rounds in the face of advancing redcoats, that's not easy, because it takes you 20 seconds to reload every time, right? I mean, some people will say, oh, I can do it at 15. Yeah, maybe, but I'm telling you, when under pressure, you're better at 20 seconds. So he stood there for a good 2 minutes as they're coming at him, and then he escaped. Okay, now, the problem in this attack is this. I'm going to go back to this one. This causeway right here, it's a killing zone. They can only go 6 men abreast. That's the description. There's only enough room to march on this causeway, 6 men across. And so what happens is, there are hundreds of men in this attack, but the enslaved soldiers that are wearing hunting shirts that I think had freedom, liberty or death, liberty to slaves on it, and some of the volunteers and sailors with cannon, they all stop here on the island. It's just the 14th Regiment that marches straight down that causeway, 6 abreast, about 120 strong, all right? And there's only about 90 men total, maybe 100, in these trenches when the battle actually breaks out. And so these guys can start firing and within range. These guys are holding their fire, and when they do fire, it's a stunning, shattering volley. And it hits one of the officers, Captain Fordyce, in the knee, and he goes down. Gets back up. And he basically rallies the men. I mean, I know this because it's all written down by the survivors. And he basically says onwards, and they go onwards. And this painting is about right. Okay, that's about what the breastworks probably look like. And Fordyce got that close. He got within 15 steps of the earthworks. And then he got pummeled with another shot, with another volley. When they found his body, there were 14 wounds in his body. He'd been shot 14 times. All right? The intense rebel, this is a letter in the newspaper, the intense rebel fire, tells you that's from a British side, from the front and flank, threw the British into some confusion. I'm sorry, that's my writing. But they were instantly rallied by Captain Fordyce and advanced along the causeway with great resolution. Thus, pressing forward, he fell within 15 steps to the breastwork. His wounds were many, and his death would have been that of a hero had he met in a better cause. That tells me it was a rebel writing. But this is a midshipman's letter, the day of the battle. The rebel fire was so heavy that we had we not retreated as we did, we should every one have been cut off. Figure yourself a strong breastwork built across the causeway, on which 6 men only could advance abreast, shoulder to shoulder. A large swamp almost surrounded them, at the back of which were 2 small breastworks to flank us. Those are the Culpeper guys, laying in the infilade fire in our attack on their entrenchments. Under these disadvantages, it was impossible to succeed. All right? So this is the Battle of Great Bridge. Within just a matter of minutes, half of Dunmore's best troops are gone, either killed instantly or mortally wounded, or just wounded to the point that they can't serve. And the Captain Leslie, who was in charge, was so shook up. He lost a nephew in this fight. He was so shook up that he abandoned the fort that night. Dunmore was not at this battle, by the way. He was in Norfolk. But the fort was abandoned that night. And then Woodford and his men go into the fort, and they see blood all over the place. They left a lot of supplies. They hold there for a day, and then they kind of follow into Norfolk. And what's going on in Norfolk? Panic. Because now all that momentum, all that confidence is gone. Dunmore and the loyalists and all that are worried that the rebels are coming for them, because they've been talking for weeks about those rebel forces coming down and burning Norfolk, because it was a den of Tories and den of loyalists. And now there's nothing to stop them, because Leslie's so upset. He says, there's a quote somewhere out there that says, I refuse to follow his bidding anymore. He's talking about Dunmore. I'm done. All right? And so they spend the winter in the Elizabeth River. That was a screen that moved. In the Elizabeth River on ships. Meanwhile, North Carolina reinforcements do arrive under Colonel Robert Howe, who, by the way, is a Continental officer. So he supersedes Woodford. And they're here. And then on January 1st, after a week or two of harassment, the rebels would go down to the shore and by the warehouses and take pot shots at the British and taunt them. And the British would keep sending messages saying, you better stop, you better stop. And so on January 1st, they start shelling the town, and they send shore parties ashore, and they try to burn out the warehouses. And then the rebels, they use that and like, hey, they started fires, let's join them. And so Norfolk is burned to the ground. Over 900 buildings are gone in this 3-day fire that breaks out. And we do most of it, and yet we blame them. And it works. It's even in the Declaration of Independence. They don't mention Norfolk, but Jefferson mentions he burns our towns. He's already burned Falmouth, Charleston in Massachusetts, and then Falmouth in Maine, which is now Portland, Maine. And now Norfolk. We blamed him for Norfolk. It wasn't until many, many years later that it was discovered. And it was just in the Washington Post, by the way, that we burned Norfolk ourselves. And it was a good strategic move, right? You don't want Lord Dunmore to have a base of operation. General Washington himself had written about this. He basically was a friend of Dunmore before all this, at least an acquaintance. They go out hunting and things. But Washington writes, I think it was in December, he says, that man must be dealt with. One way or the other, we have to deal with him. Because if we don't, it'll be like a snowball rolling down a hill. And he's going to gain strength. So this is going to make it much harder for him to maintain a base of operation in Virginia. He does. He stays here until May, and then he sails out and he goes up the bay, and he lands on a little island called Gwynn's Island, which is in Matthews County, and he's trying to create a base of operation there. But his luck is just horrible. Most of the enslaved people that have run away from him are suffering from illness. Many of them are dying of smallpox. So he can never get the troops that he needs. Eventually, he's driven out. That's a different story and out of our parameters here. So there you go, have it. I just wanted to really talk about, catch us up, and get us to the end of the year, 1775. Why is all this important? Think about what would have happened if Dunmore was able to stay and maintain his presence here. You know, I'll tell you one thing that would have happened, or wouldn't have happened. The 1st Virginia, the 3rd Virginia, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th Virginia, none of them would have been sent north. None of them would have been sent north in the summer of 76, which means that when Washington's army falls apart and he's racing across New Jersey, a year later from all this, those Virginians are not there. And he was down to only a couple thousand men, and half of them were the Virginians. So you see what I'm saying, the what ifs of all this? If we had not had the ability to send our troops north, because Dunmore was still a threat down here, who knows what would have happened up north after the fall of New York and all. So that's why this is important. And it all starts here. It all starts at Hampton. That's why I'm here. Anybody have any questions? Oh, no questions. Thank you, sir.
I'm kind of curious, you alluded a few times about the advantage that our sharpshooter, what do we call them, the ones with rifles, riflemen, why did not the British have weapons as, they did?
They didn't have them with them, they brought them over with German Jaegers, they're called, German Jaegers. There's a great diary of an officer named Johann Ewald, it's the way it's spelled. And you've got to read that book, because he was a captain of Jaegers. And the Jaegers are their version of riflemen. They had shorter rifles, but they're more accurate than the muskets. And rifles, our rifles were meant to be light infantry. It literally says that in the orders the first couple of years. Rifles, every regiment will have 2 or 3 companies of riflemen to serve as light infantry. And then midway through the war, they kind of give up on rifles. Because rifles, it's a trade-off. Rifles are more accurate, they take more time to load, probably twice as long to load. They don't mount a bayonet, because they're not a war weapon. They are a tool, a hunting tool. And so, you know, I remember this quote from, well, it was actually John Adams who got it from Richard Henry Lee, who was bragging about our riflemen and how effective they are. They're sturdy, they're stout, and they're so accurate. And then you see those companies I told you about earlier marching north, showing off. There's this famous account of two rifle brothers of Captain Benninger, I think Henry Benninger tells this account, in Captain Stevenson's company, as they stop in towns to shoot and demonstrate their marksmanship. One of the brothers think of a piece of paper, but it's a board, shaped like a paper. He puts it between his legs, stands by a tree, and tells his brother standing, they don't say how far away, go ahead, shoot it, between his legs. Nobody with a musket would even think about doing that, even if they were standing there, you know. But with the rifles, these guys, we really thought it was going to be their secret weapon. And you know, Dunmore comes up with that name, shirtmen, because everybody's wearing hunting shirts. But it's meant to be a derogatory term, but at Boston, the British learned the hard way, with shots to the head, the officers and all that in the trenches early on in August. And then, of course, in Hampton, some of those sailors are too. Something to remember is Dunmore's not, he's aware of the riflemen, because he'd been with them out a year earlier out in the west, fighting against the Shawnee Indians at Point Pleasant. Yeah, but we thought the riflemen were going to be our secret weapon. Didn't quite turn out that way. They ended up being great soldiers, Dan Morgan being the most obvious one. But eventually Washington's going to morph them and make them a light infantry unit, which is kind of your reconnaissance troops. Very similar to what the British have. He kind of copies the British. But the Jaegers are all the way to Yorktown too. We had Ewald's at Yorktown at the end.
They're different from the Prussians?
Yeah, the Hessians. We think of most of the Hessians, they're line troops. Because you got line troops that fight in formation and they volley fire typically. Riflemen are basically snipers. And they're not, I mean, they'll be trained in all that. There's a myth out there that, because early on they were a little bit loose cannons. One Pennsylvania, and I always want to stress this, it's a Pennsylvania company, not a Virginia company. We Virginians are more famous, but it was a Pennsylvania company of riflemen who mutinied in late August, early September. They tried to break some of their friends out of jail, out of confinement. And Washington basically encircled them with hundreds of troops. basically saying, you time to make up your mind, you know, which side you're gonna follow orders or not. And here's the interesting thing: the officer that was in that company with those soldiers writes later, you know, it's really our own fault. We were spoiled. When we got here, they treated us so well, they didn't make us do any fatigue duty. And the very day after the incident, the general orders from Washington are all the riflemen are to do all the duties of they're not special anymore. They've lost that shine. I could go on and on. I wrote a book about the riflemen, so they're great. They're great soldiers. Oh, come on, more questions. I don't want to say that. No more questions? Well, if you have any questions, and you want to talk to me privately, that's fine. I do have books over here if anybody's interested. Yes, sir?
All right, we have time for about one more question, and then we're on to books.
I'm curious about the economics of this in terms of the financing of where did the colonists get the backing to? Were these soldiers paid?
Yes. But the law said, well, at least the Continentals, I don't know what I couldn't find, I could look it up, but I don't know offhand what the Virginians were being paid. The militia, the Minutemen, they were getting paid a certain amount. But the Continentals were paid $6 2/3 from the Continental Congress. They took it upon themselves to raise that fund. And of course the colonies at this point, they become states in July of '76. They're all gonna pay into the fund to pay the troops. But there's a specific amount, $6 2/3. And then of course, as every year goes by, at one point they offer $20 bounties if you sign up for 3 years. Or they offer a suit of clothes and $20. And then later on it's 100 acres of land. Okay, because that's the resource that remember, we're gonna end up having land all the way to the Mississippi River. So that land is essentially gonna be used to kind of leverage or pay for the cost. But then it gets all mucked up in in the 1780s and 90s and some speculation and all that. But we don't want to go there. We want to stick to 1775.
Is it dollars then, or?
Yeah, well, it's so hard with these guys because they go back and forth, back and forth. It is $6 2/3. I know a captain gets $40 a month. Okay, so I know that, and there's a whole scale. I mean, if you are a fifer or a drummer, you get $7 1/3. Yeah, but for some reason they're using dollars instead of pounds, pounds, shillings. And remember, here in Virginia, everything was tobacco. we basically we pay our ministers 16,000 pounds of tobacco a year, according to the law. So it's a crazy form of.
That was per month?
60,000 pounds?
No,
No, 6 2/3 per month.
Per month.
Yeah, and then with the start of the Civil War, a soldier in the Union Army is getting $13 a month. So that's what 407 years. That's 87 years later. That gives you an idea what a private in 1776 and 1861 was making. Okay, again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Can we hear it from Mike Cecere, everyone?